Good day and welcome to a special episode of the Offside Musings Podcast. My name is Okey. Delighted to welcome you on behalf of my co-host Emeka Onyagwa. Today we're going to be speaking about the candidacy of Bolaji Ahmed Tinubu, the presidential candidate of the All Progressives Congress, APC. And we call today's episode a modest proposal for Mr. Tinubu. Mr. Tinubu has refused to do a debate, a town hall with the other major political candidates. In addition, Mr. Tinubu has become an embarrassment unto himself in several outings where he seems to speak somewhat in tongues and sometimes to absolutely not know the party that he represents in the forthcoming political elections. We think that it is imperative that Mr. Tinubu come out and really be open, transparent to Nigerians about his health status. And if he is unable to do this and unable to join an open debate with the other political candidates, we think that it makes sense for Mr. Tinubu to pack up his presidential campaign and go attend to his health. Welcome to today's episode.
All right.
So, I think that this is an occasion really for Nigerians to cut to the chase, and for us to lead that conversation. I think that much as it is a choice of any political party to determine who represents them, who carries their flag in an election, the political history of Nigeria is replete with political candidates who go ahead and win elections and then spend much of their tenure in office attending not to the business of Nigeria, but to the business of their health. And we think that we're seeing disturbing signs that Tinubu, the presidential candidate of the APC, does not have the health that he used to have, does not have the mental sharpness that he used to have. So that's one set of problems. Another set of problems is that Mr. Tinubu has managed in the past to get into one political office or another without answering persistent, perennial questions about his true identity, the identity of his birth, the question of his name, the question of his certificates, the question about his age. And so it is really unethical, I would say, and this is saying the least, for any person to seek to be the number one citizen of a country when that person is essentially a very unfamiliar, strange person to the collectivity that he presumes to preside over. Nigeria has suffered so much. And I would say that Bola Tinubu has been particularly fortunate in his life his reason to be a governor in Nigeria, and after serving as governor, to actually be something of the fixer for everybody who subsequently took over as governor in Lagos State and in much of the southwestern part of the country. Tinubu deserves credit for eventually getting the current incumbent president, Muhammadu Buhari, over the hump and into Aso Rock as a president. So Tinubu has gone farther than most of his compatriots in Nigeria. On the one hand, he should have every right to seek to be Nigeria's president. But in order to continue to pursue that ambition, it is only fair that Mr. Tinubu demonstrate that he is physically fit and mentally alert and equal to the task of steering the ship of the Nigerian state. It does not make sense at all that a man who appears to forget the political party on whose platform he's seeking the presidency, a man who increasingly would produce words from his lips that have no meaning, is becoming something of almost a farcical comedic performance, except that in this case, given the state of Nigeria today, it is not a comedy. It is tragedy masked as comedy. So I will say that if Tinubu doesn't feel up to appearing on stage to present, appearing on stage with the other political party, the other political candidates, his fellow contenders, in other words, to debate his platform in a shared forum and to try to impress Nigerians with the superiority of his case for the presidency. And if Mr. Tinubu does not have the stamina to present himself to be questioned by TV anchors, by radio anchors, by journalists, that it is a bad sign. And we cannot risk, as Nigerians, we cannot risk the prospect of a man who appears to be in questionable health and a man whose biography and credentials and identity is dubious at best. So that's my opening salvo right there.
Yeah, some opening. That was some opening. But there's an argument for and an argument against for Tinubu, right? The argument for Tinubu, I would say, is people will point to what they feel is his record, that he never really was the admin. He was the CEO, more like. And as far as his people that will state his argument for, would probably say he's picked some great people. He's picked Fashola, he's picked Ambode, he's picked. This is the argument.
Vice President.
He's picked Oshibanjo. He's picked the current guy, Shawolu. And they're going to tell you all these people have been great. And even when Ambode was removed, Ambode was no longer being great. That was be part of the argument for. They would say Osibanjo was in so many ways involved with great cases, including fighting for the principle of the derivation principles. In terms of the derivation principles, for those who don't know, is the clause that was the way the clause was put in the 1999 Constitution, that oil producing communities are entitled to a certain amount less than they used to be, say in 1960, for instance, far less. But more than they used to get under military administrations, right? Mm-hmm. So people would say that's a good thing. He was also part of fighting actually in court for local government funding as a right to the states, which people would say is a good thing. So those are his, and people would say he's the godfather. He's like you said, put Buhari over the hump, right? So these are some of the arguments that you can make for that they would make. I don't think anybody must make these arguments, but these are the arguments people would make and say Tinubu is great. Tinubu governs, essentially is in control of the largest states in the country. And if that state was an economy, that state would be, a top economy in Africa at the very least, right? So
that's right.
These kind of things are what people would say, that Lagos is Eko Onibaje, right? And that's his legacy. Mm-hmm. And it's all Tinubu, essentially. Those are the people that make that argument. And there's the argument against, I don't think I'm missing any of the arguments for. I don't see any of the. But that's essentially a political godfather who's put his people there, including his wife, by the way, who is a senator there in Lagos. Even though I'm not sure, I think she's from Oshun, I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. But those are the arguments for, and those will also encompass, if you care so much, he's been a senator back in the initial transition before Babangida, before 93, he was elected as a senator. So he served roughly about a year or so. So when he came back in, he was essentially referred to as Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And now he's governor and, another thing. So the argument against, obviously, is you could pretty much summarize it and say most of those things to other people who would take a look at it and say every single one of those things are bogus. Doesn't own Lagos, didn't develop Lagos. If for anything, the argument for Lagos is horrible. Prime estates in Lagos don't have functional flowing roads. Lekki, for instance, the traffic is insane. There is no public school in Lekki Phase 1, which is the premier part of Lekki by a mile. There's no public school there. There's no water in that part of Lagos, but there's tolls everywhere to collect money, right? There have been new creations of new ballets and new obas, and people would have the argument that some of these obas existed, but objectively, if they existed, they didn't exist before 1999. So maybe they existed somewhere else. Nobody found it fit to enthrone and expand the powers of some of these obas, like the Oba of Oniro and other places, which that's the other argument against. So essentially, every other thing that people would say is an argument for, people that would go in step by step and tell you it's not. And more importantly, he's a man who does a lot of cronyism, crony capitalism, and he does it in conjunction with the Nigerian or the African political system of, I wouldn't say just the African. It used to happen in America to some degree, right? We could draw that analogy with even New York, where I live, where back in the 20s, New York was so corrupt. I've forgotten their names. Oof. I did not write down, but this is not about New York, but just essentially there were a whole bunch of lords. I've forgotten his name. He never was in office though. But they used to dominate New York. In fact, that's why New York had the reputation it did. And people from New York found it near impossible at the point in time to break into national limelight, right? To point to the reason why even an Alfred E. Smith might have lost, but people will say it's Catholicism, but it's just the analogous to it, right? even in America, places like New York or places that were more off the limb, other places were, yeah, but not to compare it to America. It's just the analogy sometimes, to say that there's something new about the thuggery, the essential official thuggery of Lagos, where they maintain a quasi state police and a quasi parliamentary outfit in order to control the electorate, control the elections itself. Forget about just the electorate. To some degree, they control the electorate, right? You've seen Obas come and threaten physically. Obas in conjunction with people like Tinubu come out and physically threaten ethnic groups, like mine, for instance. Come out and physically actually threaten them and facing assault, assault is just a credible threat of violence. And in some cases, it actually does turn to violence, right? So, yeah, those are some of the arguments against. And the thing now is getting to today. The thing now is, you now have all these things on the national stage, and that's why I brought the analogy with New York. You have on the national stage where you have over about 270 something official linguistical languages. Not dialects, languages. And by the way, when we say 200 and something, we are not, we are going by what linguists have studied and all that. So when I say that, I'm saying that to even say that places in Bielsa, in Port Harcourt, who might say, oh, they are not Igbos, are actually linguistically and biologically and archaeologically classified as Igbos. That's just to point out that these don't even include, these are all included as one language. So you have 300 of these, 200 and something of these languages, So a lot of ethnic groups, a lot of people who are, who should be somewhat independent, if we want to be somewhat independent of their affairs, are now having to grapple with the fact that they've brought this guy, a party who has within his rights to bring somebody like this. They brought him to the national stage. And a lot of general, just ordinary day Nigerians would love to find out, where are you from, Mr. Tinubu? Who are you really? Love to have real questions about your so-called achievements and what you intend. And he refuses to engage with any other candidates, and more importantly, when he has shown up in public, I don't know if there's some other language he speaks. There are a lot of languages in Nigeria, but he doesn't seem to be speaking a language I understand very much. I don't really know what he's speaking, but it would be nice if he had a translator for the rest of us who are.
Yeah, there's this gobbledygook, that the man spews, and there is something unseemly, really, about his the way that is being packaged. As you are aware, a picture was released seemingly of Tinubu as a teenager, and it turns out that that picture is not him at all, but it's a picture of the guy who was the former governor of Cross River State. What's his name? Say?
Is it Lily Moke or which
No,
one?
no, not Lily Moke. The guy before him.
Can't be Donald Duke.
Donald Duke. Absolutely.
Was that Donald Duke?
Yeah, Donald Duke, actually. So Donald Duke has come out, and said that this was him, So and this picture came out in a documentary that was put together by Tinubu's people to promote Tinubu as this a person with a pedigree and a person with a past and so on. So first of all, did Tinubu not preview this before it was released? Didn't he preview it before it was released? And if he did, then is it the case that he did not recognize that this wasn't his own picture as a teenager? So, so it's becoming, so I see you laughing because on the one hand, it's if it were entertainment, right? If this were a candidate doing a parody of a presidential candidate, it would be funny. The way he speaks, the way he basically, from the very moment of his after he won, in fact, before he won the APC nomination, right? There was that incident where people believed that he peed on himself. There was the fact that when he went to the APC convention, he couldn't even hold up the flag. His hands were shaking. He could hardly give a speech. This is somebody who has just won the nomination of his party. And of course, Nigerians were privy to the way that the primary in the APC as well as in the PDP was really a dollar fest, where the man, the candidate who provided the most dollar, essentially stole the prize. And then we remember, you recall the episode of him after he chose a Muslim, fellow Muslim, because he is at least notionally a Muslim. After he chose a fellow Muslim as his vice presidential candidate, that he orchestrated this support by Christian clerics, Christian ecclesiastical personalities, So, and what happened was he just went and gathered some riffraff, and dressed them up in the garb of bishops and paraded them as people who had come to voice support of his Muslim ticket. And then, just the gaffes, from the moment when he said that to his supporters, if anybody says they want a change of government, tell them to shut up their mouth, and then he starts speaking this language, which we don't know whether it's Czech or Russian or Polish or or just some kind of language that is spoken by people who are communing with, higher spirits and so on and so forth, and it looks on the surface like a joke. But the truth is that this is a tragedy in rehearsal, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And at no point should any country countenance somebody who is of unsound mind as their president. But it's even more critical in this case in a Nigeria where, as we point out again and again, basically our oil exports, our oil revenues have bottomed out at zero, essentially. Even the central bank governor said it on his Twitter handle that Nigeria used to get like $3 billion every month from oil exports. And he says that now it's actually zero that comes in, okay? And that's because we have created this absurdity where perhaps all of Nigeria's oil exports are bunkered illegally, okay, are stolen by people, which suggests that people at the highest tops of the government are implicated in this crime, right? But at any rate, you have an APC government that has become an abject failure, okay, at everything, including securing Nigeria's most prized asset, its oil resource. So you don't have any money. Nigeria is now in the position of having to borrow money to meet its recurrent obligations, to pay salaries, to pay its debt, And so, given how bad the situation is in the country, the idea that the candidate of the ruling party is somebody who is running a campaign, almost a campaign that suggests unseriousness, okay? But we see a mingling of a certain kind of hubris, a certain kind of arrogance in his conduct. People ask questions and you just whip up their questions, okay? And you whip the questions off not even directly, but through surrogate that you send to television interviews, that you send to write press releases and so on. It suggests that there is perhaps a plan to foist this candidate on Nigerians. And if it succeeds, it is likely to trigger such fierce response amongst Nigerians that the whole country could turn out to be ungovernable. But even if Nigerians were cowed somehow into silence or into submission in the face of such an imposition, clearly a president who cannot articulate himself, a president who is scared of meeting with other presidential candidates, and a president who remains a stranger is such a devastating prospect as president, that I would say to Tinubu, if he watches this, or if he knows somebody who is close to him who will give him the message, that whatever modicum of respectability he has, and I hazard that he has very little left, but whatever modicum of respectability he has, he should secure it. He should husband it by leaving the presidential race, because it's becoming a daily exercise in embarrassment and in it's become a parody, really, and an unflattering parody.
Yeah, I think there's little to no chance of that happening, because a lot of the people that are set to benefit from Tinubu at the national level are not going to even let him. And there are all sorts of people that still benefit in Lagos. I have personal friends who I went to school with who benefit directly from being under the Tinubu umbrella. They are essentially, actually, funny enough, as much as we all joke about Emeka, right? His whole political party structure in Lagos is founded on that principle to a large degree, right? So you have people who are in positions who are, like, I have a friend who is in a local government developmental position as a councillor, made a lot of noise, and I think he's in line to now be in the Lagos State House of Assembly. Essentially, his Emeka turn has come, and that's the way they tend to do it. They have different positions where, structurally, local government councillor is equivalent of a town councillor in the US, right, or in the UK. You wouldn't go straight to be the town mayor, because the mayor has to vacate, and even at that, it's your turn. But you have various. So there's a whole political structure that benefits. And this is on the lower level, right? there are whole political structures that benefit from who are going to benefit for themselves for Tinubu being in power. All left, right, and center. Him, his wife, his kids. His son that stays in the UK is back in Nigeria, fully on campaign. And left, right, and center, all kinds of people are going to financially benefit. So there's 0 to no chance that he's going to be like, I'll put the chance at probably like 0.01%, right? Somewhere around there. I won't say there's no chance
of him stepping away.
Yeah. The question is what's going to happen, really.
Yeah.
He's not stepping away.
Yeah. Of course, the thing is, we make suggestions, prescriptions on this podcast. We have suggested actually that there is no point to holding elections next year, because whoever takes over, and it's a point that I like to reiterate again and again because I'm so certain that would be the case. It doesn't matter who wins next year's elections. The country is going nowhere fast because things are so bad that it would be a massive achievement if somebody actually holds Nigeria in the current pattern and says, let it not deteriorate further. There are signs that the country will continue to go in a disastrous direction, So just to hold things in the current pattern and to stem this deterioration will be an achievement already. But whoever you elect, I don't think that there are the resources. Depending. You could have Nigerians and the international community decide to pour in resources to resuscitate the country, depending on their read of the seriousness of the new administration. But ideally, Nigeria should have a reset where, as I've said before, experts in different areas of experience, the different professional areas, sort of come up with policies to reset our educational sector, our healthcare system, give Nigeria a healthcare system for the first time in decades, lay out kind of plan for infrastructure, infrastructural investment, and so on and so forth. But begin with a constitution that makes sense for such a complex organism as Nigeria. But leaving that aside, I'm not confident that Tinubu, unless Tinubu falls on his face, I don't see him quitting the race. And even if he falls on his face, it could be one of those situations where he's flown abroad and somebody will call him, as Obasanjo called Umaru Yar'Adua and say, Umaru, are you dead? No, you're not dead. So, but Tinubu should actually recognize, unfortunately, people like that are shielded from their own, from the evidence of their own embarrassment. Because if he could see the videos of himself that are out there where he starts a sentence and he doesn't know where he's going, and then he brings in all this language that is absolutely unintelligible to anybody that I know.
Somebody asked him that question about social media, and he said he started off by saying something about he doesn't listen to social media.
Yes.
And then he just ends up in the regular talking about God knows what. But at the end of the day, right, and that's another argument for Tinubu, right, that people have, right? They feel any well-intentioned person should not be saddled with this, what is looking like a more disastrous country, if there's any such thing. I don't say if there's any such thing, but because, that's the philosophical conversation about how bad is bad. Anyway, not to go down that route, but if people feel they don't want somebody that has some level of intent. When I say this, I think people generally are referring to Peter Obi. They don't want Peter Obi to win the elections. Genuinely, these are not tribalists or any of those things. These are genuine people. So a lot of them, some of them are actually Igbo people. Some Yoruba people. Some people feel this is a mess. And in some ways, maybe they have their own, some of them have their own ideology of their own belief that a more autonomous unit for the ethnic groups would be a lot better. They might break away, they might not break away. But a lot of them do have that. A lot of people do have. In fact, I kind of have that view that at the end of the day, I think ethnic groups need to generally have autonomy. I don't even mean like ethnic groups like, oh, all the Yorubas all put together need to have one. No, I don't feel that way. I feel maybe Yoruba areas, yeah, sure, but even within Yoruba areas, they might not all want to be under one political umbrella. If the history of prehistory and history of Nigeria is any guide, you pretty much are likely not to see them all under one umbrella. If for anything, you're more likely to see large parts of what used to be the eastern region still under one umbrella. Maybe not all of it, but large parts of it. But, I just feel some of these guys, some of these people who genuinely don't want a Peter Obi there is like somebody like a Peter Obi who they feel has good intentions. And the other people who have good intentions, who have run or who are running, I think Pastor Tommy has good intentions. I think
but Pastor Tommy is not running.
He's not running this year. This time he's behind this thing. What was this guy's name from the north? A couple of them have like good intentions, and most people at this point, not most people, I'm not using most people, but quite a number of people at this point feel like, look, man, this is going to be disastrous. Let the disaster play out. Don't let an already marginalized ethnic group like the Igbos produce a president that is going to have to preside over essentially, man, chaos. And that's an argument that those that some have against Peter Obi and for Tinubu. That Tinubu has been at the forefront, has benefited personally on a personal level from a decline in Nigeria. Kind of like if you play the stock market, you can actually buy stocks to say that you can actually go on the stock market and buy stocks that says that the stock market is going to crash. You can make money either way, right? So Tinubu has been that guy that has gone into the stock market and bought index funds that Nigeria is going to crash and has benefited from it. So people feel like, okay, let this guy go and enjoy what he has created, right? It's going to crash anyway. Yeah, it's going to crash, but I'm more of, I stay more in, I think more of the human perspective is, to me, and in this case, a human collective perspective is just the amount of people that are already suffering and are going to massively suffer. Is there such a word? But yeah, they're going to, the suffering is going to be on such a scale that, it's we all feel it overseas, whether you're abroad, wherever you are in the country. We can give anecdotal stories about our own experiences, the way we that don't even live in the country, the way we feel, the kind of pressure we have from people, people who are even 10 years ago were doing okay, consistently have to come back for help. And it's almost like almost everybody in the country that is doing well is a super vulture right now of some sort. So a lot of people just want the system to collapse on itself because they can't. The finance minister, as an example, right? The finance minister sometime last week, today's Sunday, yeah, sometime last week, went to the World Bank to borrow, I believe, 7.8 million to buy furniture for yeah, that figure is correct. I believe, yeah, it's $7.8 million to buy furniture.
I didn't see that story. Maybe because I've been on the road.
You've been on the road. You traveled. You went to. There's been a bunch of very interesting stories. The finance minister came out. First things first. She always seems lost in the sauce. I use that to just describe her You asked her, but you asked this lady about anything, and she doesn't seem to know. And to some degree, we can say, okay, there's a sort of a nostalgia. There's such of a measurement to somebody like Okonjo-Iweala who did so much and as finance minister, right? But to some degree, on the base level, what you expect from a finance minister is not being met, has largely not been met ever since Okonjo-Iweala left. Even with the Kemi Adeosun that was in office, but Kemi Adeosun at least resigned in honor, right? They made accusations against her. She resigned. She went to clear her name, which she did, by the way. But she didn't have an opportunity in the office to be, so that, essentially that's another argument for Tinubu. Like people feel like, well, it's bad, but I don't feel.
I understand that, so but for me, that should not be it's sort of a poetic justice to say, okay, this guy has contributed to perhaps an inordinate degree to the destruction of a country, so he might as well receive the carcass of this shell of a nation, this empty edifice that we currently call Nigeria. So I can understand on some emotional level that sense of let this be the poetic justice, let one of the prominent profiteers from the despoliation of Nigeria handle the final affairs, the winding up of this wretched entity. But then I think that it's a mistake ultimately to say that, because for all we know, I mean, Nigeria continues to surprise us. It was in the 80s when then military dictator Ibrahim Babangida said that Nigeria mystified him, that he actually couldn't figure out how Nigeria continued to survive. Well, Babangida was speaking with particular insight because he knew what he and his cohort had done to destroy the country. And somehow, because of the energy and the ingenuity and the creativity of Nigerians, ordinary Nigerians mostly, they continue to reproduce their nation day after day after day. But then we have come to the point where things have come to a head. But my point is that Nigeria is actually capable of getting worse dramatically, and yet maintaining this semblance of being a national space, right? And part of it is that because of the sheer population, there are still foreigners who make private investment, and there are Nigerians who make massive remittances to their relatives back in Nigeria. So businesses, to some degree, continue to run, some businesses. So I think that if you put Nigeria in the hands of a Tinubu, he's not necessarily going to wind up the country. He's not going to be an undertaker. He's going to actually preside over the worsening of the condition of the country, both by acts of commission, because a man as unprepared as he is going to perhaps see himself driven by this blind, naked desire for accumulation, and is already surrounded, as you rightly said, and it's not him, by the way. Every Nigerian political major political figure, is surrounded by people who want to go into government or are near the government in order to steal as much as they're able to. So the point, though, is that a Tinubu presidency runs the risk of actually both continuing this facade of a Nigerian nation whilst worsening the condition of the country. So that, in a sense, what we're going to do is that 4 years later, we're going to say, okay, there is no state that is safe. Unknown gunmen, terrorists are on every street, and then we say, okay, let's find somebody to go clean up that mess, and it becomes more and more and more difficult. And that's why, ideally, we should pause. We should think seriously about this inauguration of a rescue emergency government in Nigeria.
Yeah. Nigeria is such a...
And by the way, just one more point. If that emergency rescue government determines by getting a sense from Nigerians that they don't want to coexist in this space called Nigeria, I've always believed in the right of any people to seek to self-determination. So if a small village in some little part of Nigeria wants to succeed from Nigeria, and they establish so in a plebiscite, I support their right to exist outside of the Nigerian nation space.
Yeah, I mean, it's to some degrees. The philosophical question to me is aptly can aptly be thought about in Nigeria in terms of what is suffering, but what does it really mean? What is the worst of the worst? People don't really want to go. Nobody really wants to think of what the worst of the worst might be. But then again, to some degree, there's a whole fight type. But there's a whole flow. What really is it? Does it lead to another door to something else? Because it's almost like with Nigeria, is like really. When I think of one thinks of some of these things that we think about philosophically. It's on one side what suffering is, what it really is. Another side too is it shows is it real when people don't seem to ever want to grapple with it, right? What's happening today in Nigeria? Everybody's talking about japa. Japa, for those that don't know, is people looking for ways to relocate from the country, left, right, and center. And it's not even the common man. These are people that have good jobs. Some of them have multiple houses. I was on the phone with some of my friends this week, and sister works on our company, and boom, she's relocated to London, right? And all that. So it's another way of everybody. If the elites are leaving the country, like my friend was like, essentially the ministries are just now, the government parastatals in Nigeria are just now dominated by essentially favored people who essentially most of them are from the north. Most of them tend to be Fulani, some cases outside, but or people that are intermarried with the right kind of people. It's just the fact, the best people are leaving, the civil servants, the better civil servants, the better people that have the better jobs are leaving, right? So it's a country that essentially doesn't really face what suffering is. What is this? Does it exist? In some ways, it shows up in our entertainment skills, right? We are objectively good at entertainment. I think anywhere in the world you go, you wouldn't make the argument on the contrary, like, Nigeria is not good in entertainment. Objectively, we are good in entertainment, whether it's comedy skits, whether it's comedy, whether it's music, whether it's movies. The world has seen objectively. So, that might be a coping mechanism from an individual and even from a societal level. So, right. So the question now becomes like, okay, so how far does this go in terms of Tinubu? Like, how far does it, if Tinubu gets into power, how far does it go? Does it ever get to the point. I mean, we're seeing a rise in suicides and suicidal inclinations in Nigeria more and more, right? We're seeing all kinds of despair. And these are the ones we are able to even see. Just think of the ones we're not even able to see, by the way, right? So how far can it go? We're hearing stories that in some cases we can't really confirm, but I don't really go about doubting them. Hearing stories of a rise in, for instance, cannibalism. But even if you doubt and say these are anecdotal stories that they might not be true, we are seeing the upscale of violence from all kinds of quarters in Nigeria, right? So question becomes how far, can people go with suffering in terms of if you have a Tinubu there, how far can we go without grappling, without thinking through our problems? Whatever, I don't, I mean, it's something we should think about as a country, but I think we look for ways, generally to not think, and to put a Tinubu there is essentially, I don't feel it's a thought experiment in as much as I feel is a malicious and a kind of a misery loves company kind of act. It might be somewhat of a thought experiment for those of us just watching it, but it's like a misery loves company kind of act, like for anybody to sit down and be saying, even with the best of intentions, right? Or the worst of intentions, depending on, because the direct opposite of suffering, how far can you suffer is also what's the direct opposite of that? There's always an opposite to anything, right? So even to put somebody like that there is like, is a level of it's a level of, to me, anybody proposing this from a subjective manner it's either you don't care how every other person around you fares, right? Meaning you're willing to live the life you're living, whatever way, maybe you feel is good, right? I saw Davido going for his uncle's inauguration and convoy alone that he had. It's like, it's obscene. I don't even think the American president has that amount of cars in his convoy, right? So to somebody that might be, they perceive that to themselves. Somebody that has that, a typical person that walks around with this kind of security, perceives that to himself as a level of happiness or enjoyment. I would love to understand how that happens. I mean, I know how that kind of happens, but I'd love to understand how the person thinks it through. This is a level of enjoyment. But the question is always, how far can society go? Is there a breaking point? Is it? But putting a Tinubu there seems just like a whole, an exercise in personal self-hate of some sort. Right?
Yeah, I mean, to just cut in, if you don't mind, I think that you've hit certain notes of the argument. One is that there is a level of despair in the country, clearly, where even Nigerians who are doing well, quote unquote, a lot of them want out. And a lot of them are leaving their jobs, Again, I was speaking about a week and a half ago to a Nigerian who is highly placed in one of the government agencies. And he was telling me of an agency that hired Nigerians, an agency of the federal government, one of the parastatals, as we call them, hired a group of young Nigerians over the last 2 years, that 30-something of them have quit their jobs and left for Canada. Okay? And we find a situation where every year Nigerian universities sort of funnel into the economy new graduates who have spent in excess of 4, 5, 6, 7 years to get their first degrees because of incessant strikes within the system, because of other dysfunctions within the system. And some of them have had very little education. And so they're not equipped to undertake tasks that you would expect that people who have received degrees in their different areas should be able to take on. And so there are no jobs coming up, because the private sector is shrinking. The unstable exchange rate of the naira has meant that a lot of businesses in Nigeria, which inevitably tend to import things from outside of the country, can no longer afford the cost of those importations, because there is a limit to how much cost component you can transfer to your ultimate consumers, and then yet expect, and then continue to expect them to buy your products. So the economy is fundamentally, structurally weakened. Okay, and so yes, as you rightly pointed out, a lot of Nigerians are escaping from the country in great desperation, and then you find that to do basic moves like Davido going to his uncle's inauguration, he packs a convoy of police, maybe the military, that even the US president does not travel with. How are you going to sustain that? For years, we made a point that it didn't make sense that we have a police force whose quote-unquote best are farmed out to private individuals. And a lot of these private individuals are simply criminals who have gamed the system, made some wealth, and they go to a police commissioner or the inspector general of police, and they are giving police escorts, to intimidate people. They can ram their convoys into your car, destroy your car, beat you up, and move on. So these are law enforcement people who have become criminal elements on behalf of private individuals who have had the police assigned to them. So it all amounts to a country to a failed state. Nigeria is a failed state. There's no security to speak of. There is actually, for years, there's been nothing that the Nigerian state, very little that the Nigerian state provides. So if you want good schools, you have to send your kids to private schools because most government-run schools are in shambles. If you want electricity, you buy yourself a generator. If you want water, you dig a borehole. If you want security, you pay to have megats and some police guard your home and other property. So at every sector, citizens have to fend for themselves, which is also a driver of corruption in the country. If you have to pay rent or build yourself a house, and very few banks will give you loans to build a house at rates that are sensible. So you ultimately have to steal a lot. If you want to build a house, you have to steal a lot. If you want to be able to move around so that you have several cars at once, you have to be able to steal a lot to fly yourself abroad for medical care when you're sick or your loved ones are sick. So we have created this system where at every point things have collapsed. Mm-hmm. And yet we're talking about an election, and we're talking about an election in which a candidate who is clearly scared to have a debate with the other contenders, and a candidate who is scared of taking questions about the most personal, the most basic biographical details of, what name were you born with, when were you born, where, who are your parents, who are your siblings. Where did you go to school? When did you graduate? Who were your classmates? These are basic questions that Nigerians should not be begging. Every candidate should be willing to come up and say, hey, this was my birthday. These were the schools I went to. These were the dates of being a student in that school. These were my classmates. That information should be easily corroborated.
Especially at like secondary school level, primary school level.
Absolutely. So I don't understand it. I don't understand, and some people will make it about ethnic politics. Some people will make it about religious politics. But for me, ultimately, it is at the very level, at the very basic level of logic. It does not make sense. If somebody comes, if my kids were babies, and I was interviewing baby nannies who will mind the kids, right? And this nanny cannot verify what their name is or where they are from and where they went to school and so on. I won't hire them to be my nannies. So why would we contemplate hiring a president to run our country about whom we have no knowledge in relation to very basic things that we should know about?
We could keep telling stories, anecdotal stories, so many.
Yeah,
but, it is something we'll keep talking about. We got so many anecdotal stories to tell from this level.
So I basically have a very, what I will call a modest proposal to Mr. Tinubu, and that is just, carry the little, modicum of whatever it is that you have, whether you call it respect or prestige or whatever. Just retreat, and Nigerians can see that you don't have it together. You did once. The man could speak clearly at one point, could communicate clearly at one point, could hold a conversation at one point. Clearly, the Tinubu we see today is a much diminished version of the Tinubu of yesterday.
Do you, by the way, think if the version of Tinubu wasn't diminished, do you think that version of Tinubu that was not diminished, keep age aside, let's assume with age he actually did get better, right? Do you think that version of Tinubu would ever? This is not something we can objectively know, but do you think he'll have ever personally run for office? And I say this because reportedly 8 years ago, he refused to run because he didn't want a Muslim ticket. Or maybe he was saving face, by the way.
No. I think that what happened was that Tinubu felt that it would be his turn 8 years later. And he knew that a Muslim ticket, if he had decided to run with Buhari as a Muslim ticket. First of all, there was a question of whether Buhari would have accepted him, right? Because Buhari was also sold to us as Mr. Change, Mr. Anti-Corruption. And Tinubu clearly represented in the Nigerian imagination an embodiment of corruption on some level. Okay, none of the scandals today were unknown 8 years ago. Nigerians knew that Tinubu had some kind of entanglement in a drug scandal, right? Nigerians knew that Tinubu's story wasn't straight as to which university he attended in the US, what his resume was, and how he came to his stupendous wealth and so on and so forth. So I think that Buhari would have lost his luster absolutely had he consented to running with.
But he consented. He was part of the alliance, so I don't see that as. I just feel like Tinubu 8 years ago might, with his senses, realize like he is a candidate with so many holes for the national stage. Similar to the analogy of New York back in the 20s. I was trying to look for this thing, but my distance didn't open up. Similar to Nigeria, I feel like a guy like that would understand he had holes. The country doesn't need to be this thing, but maybe because I'm not sure if his decline is part of his decision to run. That there's sadly there are people who, whether they are young or old, they start having like some kind of start having mental deterioration. They start making very irrational decisions,
impulsive decisions.
Yeah, which I kind of feel like this might be.
Okay, I very much think that Tinubu intended, when he was proposing Buhari, that he intended to succeed Buhari. I think so. I think that when he put Buhari there, that, as he said in Abeokuta, that he imagined that 8 years later it would be the turn of the Yoruba and personally his own turn, which is why he was unforgiving for Osinbajo, the vice president, when Osinbajo decided to seek the party's nomination. So I think that ultimately this was always his plan. What's happened is that the man has deteriorated so much, but instead of then adjusting his plan, he actually maybe has an exaggerated sense of his own preparedness, of his own fitness to run.
But if that's the case, that begs the question that his disposition towards other ethnic groups, in this particular case, Igbos, doesn't seem to be fake. It seems to be real that he is. We use the term tribalistic, but for those who are listening, I just like to use general terms that we can understand.
Yeah,
he's racist and anti-Semitic to some degree. We can classify Igbos in that Semitic mode. You can say he's that kind of person then.
Oh, that Igbos, you believe that the Igbo are part of the Israelites.
You see the jokes that his wife even made, even though she was, you don't marry our people, blah, 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 whatever she said. And people said it was tongue-in-cheek, which is fine. I don't really, I've heard all these kind of things all my life, so it doesn't make me wake up.
I tell you something.
See, a guy like that, right, if you sincerely believed, right, that it should be your turn, it will be your turn next, and you were planning, putting Osinbajo there, after we've had 8 years of, and this is tribal politics. There's no way of getting around it unless you want to be sincere.
Well, yeah.
If you've had 8 years of Obasanjo, right, and you put Osinbajo there 8 years, well, you had Jonathan and Goodness, you now put Osinbajo there, and then now you want to come back again. It shows a certain level of I don't care about, which, it's kind. I don't know. I just feel.
Let me be the devil's advocate. And by the way, I like to use sort of the ethnic rather than the tribal, because tribal sort of becomes an anthropological term suggesting that we Africans are tribes and in a way that the Europeans are not. But
if I said tribe, just scratch it.
Yes. So, but the thing is, in fairness to Tinubu, okay. In fairness to him, there is nobody who plays a political game for somebody else. And my point is that if an Igbo person is going to be president of Nigeria, it should be Igbo people who make the point. It should be an Igbo candidate or Igbo people who make the point that they should be president, right? It should not fall to Tinubu. If the Igbo can put their act together and the Yoruba and the House of Fulani find infinite opportunities to, as it were, pass the ball between the two ethnic groups, you know, they don't owe you in politics. They don't owe you to say, hey, pause, let's give the ball to our Igbo brother, right? It is the Igbo ultimately who have to come out and make a pitch and strike the alliances that are necessary, do the strategic planning that is necessary in order to achieve the presidency. So that's one. But the other thing is that also that there's this, we adopted a zoning arrangement in Nigeria, okay? And some people say, okay, the zone is, the north, the southwest, and the southeast, right? But some people just feel it should be north and south. So we ping the ball to the north at one point, and then they shoot it back, and whichever groups within the southern half of the country that gets it. So whether it's the Yoruba who always get it, if they're the ones who put their act together, you know, I sort of understand that, right? What and by the way, you know that I don't know if you saw it, but there is this major politician in the Southwest who said he was supporting Tinubu for the presidency, and he was asked, but why would you support Tinubu when the Igbo have not been there? And he said, no, that Obasanjo is an Igbo man, and I don't know, you didn't see it.
I didn't see it, but
okay,
but and
he said he alleged, and this is if I find the video, I'll send it to you. And he said that that his father was from Onitsha, So there's this picture that was shown that has been circulated at some point
that picture hasn't been repeated by anybody.
Yeah, precisely. Oh. Well, so, and I know that a Yoruba friend of mine has joked in the past, and said to me, okay, some of you Igbo are insisting on an Igbo becoming president. You've had your turn. Obasanjo is Igbo. Anyway, and I sort of cussed him out, and I said, yeah, you go and get somebody as depraved as Obasanjo, and you hand it to the Igbo people. Anyway, but so to sort of conclude on this point, I don't have anything against Tinubu wanting to be president as a Yoruba person, right? That's not my problem with him. In fact, the thing is that if Tinubu were a good stellar candidate, right, and running against, say, an Igbo person that I consider mediocre, I'll support Tinubu. Because I don't think that having a president who comes from either your ethnicity or your state or your hometown necessarily helps you if that leader is mediocre or disastrous, right? The problem with Tinubu is that the man is clearly unqualified in character, in mental fitness, in physical sharpness to run anything but his own health. That's what he should do. Tinubu should...
He can't even run his health.
Precisely. Tinubu should spend all his time thinking about keeping himself healthy for as long as it pleases God to keep him.
It's a fair thought. I think it's a fair thought. It's just thinking how much his decline played into it. And even if his decline wasn't there, to be honest, he was always a very flawed candidate. He's always proven everything about him is false.
Because, everything about him is unknown, okay? And because it's unknown and questions have been raised, yes, I will agree with you that it's false. If
Everything is put forward by himself.
If people don't know what your name is,
even your employment history, nothing, zero.
Your employment history.
Say you worked here, you go there, they deny you.
Your parents, the school that you went to, and so on. It's bad, and I don't think if Nigeria ends up finding a Tinubu as their president, right? If that happens, then Nigeria is guaranteed to get worse than it is currently. And that's because such a president will be easy to manipulate and to blackmail, both within Nigeria and outside, because there are people who have information on him who can always threaten to release that information, and the president will then be cast in a position perhaps even of borrowing money in order to pay off these potential blackmailers. Nigeria simply, it's unthinkable in my mind that Nigeria would have somebody whose story isn't straight. To running the country.
The blackmail part, I don't feel people are going to blackmail him. I just personally feel like is somebody that doesn't have any kind of good intentions to be in that for being in that office.
Yeah. Nations can blackmail you, right? If powerful nations can easily blackmail you, they have access. All the questions we ask, right? Yeah. All the questions we ask of Tinubu, trust me, the U.S. government knows Tinubu's birth date. Okay? They know, they must have a file on him. They will know when he was born. They will know who his parents are. They will know where he really went to school or didn't go to school. Do you understand? The British government will have the same information. Perhaps the Russians, the Israelis. Do you understand?
The Israelis, I believe.
Yeah. So it would be easy to say to a president with such massive deficits that you must do this or else, and he wouldn't have the spine, he wouldn't have the presence of mind to say, to hell with you, release the information, So such a man is susceptible to being blackmailed.
I'm bugged about, you can be susceptible to blackmail, right? Internationally, right? What was it going to be? Regular stuff like Palestinian or whatever issues, right? The bigher problem is the situation in the country. But I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I do agree, especially with. I also agree that it's about candidate quality in terms of who is best. I agree on that. It's not about tribal. If Yorubas can from now until my possible grandchildren are all dead, produce the president, and Nigeria is such a fantastic place, then so be it. Singapore is a great example for one group of people ruling for God knows how long, and many people want to live there, right? So, it's just wondering how much, exactly what you're saying in terms of compromise externally, the internal compromise of this person. Is this person even like an out and out? And Nigeria, tribalism is just part for the course at every day, every second, every way. And when we say tribalism, we do mean more or less black racism, but
ethnic,
ethnic. It's not rivalry. It's
tribalism is discrimination, ethnic jingoism,
whichever term we want to use.
Triumphalism.
I use all those. You can think of it as racism. Sadly, it is the truth, which is why you might see a lot of Nigerians don't what you might call racism overseas is just like, all right, no problem. It's like this is like, so yeah, it speaks to the guy, but I think just more to it is just trying to speak to his mindset. Is he tribal? But at the end of the day, what ends up mattering is what his possible intentions are, what people backing him, what they see, and that's just that. But anyway, I think we've gone on.
Yeah, we've gone on longer than we usually do, and longer than we planned. So so we'll see. We'll see. This is a conversation that will continue as the campaigns progress. But clearly, Mr. Tinubu is in our radar. And we think that the best thing, at least I think that the best thing for Tinubu to do at this point is to bow out of the presidential races. I don't expect him to take me at my suggestion to take it up, but ultimately it's going to be a case where win you lose, you lose, So if he wins, he's going to be a disastrous president. He just doesn't have it. If he loses, it's going to be terrible for him, and he will wish that he had left the field when at least he could still retain a little bit of some iota of respect, if that's possible.
Yep.
Anyway, so it's such a delight to be back with you after a little break. Again, due to I was on the road, but I'm back in the United States, and we look forward to having you join us in another episode. Have a brilliant rest of the week.
All right.